Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today is Poetry Thursday, and I'm going to be combining this episode of Poetry Thursday with my series on books that I loved to teach, and I'm going to focus specifically on 5 poems that I loved to teach. While I ultimately taught many of the major American and British poets in the various courses that I taught over my 40-year career, I would always try to start my poetry units by teaching poems that were very accessible to students and poems that were or that revolved around a theme that I thought students would be able to relate to. One of the things that I commonly did in my senior English classes was that I would introduce poetry by teaching about poetry related to the theme of families, and specifically parent and child relationships. Seniors in high school who are preparing to go away from home, many of them for the first time, are actually thinking very much about their homes, their families, their relationships with their siblings, and their relationships with their parents. So it was a really good way to get kids to read poetry, to understand that they could relate to it and identify with the subject matter of the poems. And after this kind of an introduction, I could pretty much go anywhere in poetry and teach and teach all different kinds of poets and different kinds of poetic forms. So I'm going to today share just a few poems that I used to teach, that I would introduce to students when we would start reading poetry, and these are all about the parent-child relationship. Some of these are poems that I have shared on other occasions related to other themes, or perhaps because I was focusing on a particular poet, and some of them I don't think I've ever shared on the channel. But all 5 of these were poems that I would teach early on to my seniors as a way of getting them introduced to reading and writing about and talking about poetry. So the first one that I'm going to read is a poem about a poet thinking about an early separation from her daughter. And this always had an emotional impact on my students, especially on the senior girls that I was teaching. This is Linda Pastan's poem to a daughter leaving home. When I taught you at 8 to ride a bicycle, loping along beside you as you wobbled away on 2 round wheels, my own mouth rounding in surprise when you pulled ahead down the curved path of the park, I kept waiting for the thud of your crash as I sprinted to catch up, while you grew smaller, more breakable with distance, pumping for your life, screaming with laughter, the hair flapping behind you like a handkerchief, waving goodbye. Another poem that I used to love to teach, especially in advanced placement English, is a poem called The Century Quilt for Sarah Mary Taylor Quilter by Marilyn Nelson Waniek. This is a poem that was actually on the AP English Literature exam one year. It was the poem that students were given to read and analyze and write an essay about. And then the College Board released the poem, the essay question, and student writing samples so that teachers could use all of those materials as teaching tools to show students, what were really effective essays, what were, medium level essays, and what were the weaker essays. So I would always teach this poem and then let students read what other seniors in high school had written about this poem. So this is a poem that is really about how a treasured family object, a treasured family heirloom, can actually contain an entire family's history. The Century Quilt for Sarah Mary Taylor Quilter. My sister and I were in love with Mima's Indian blanket. We fell asleep under army green issued to Daddy by supply. When Mima came to live with us, she brought her medicines, her cane, and the blanket I found on my sister's bed the last time I visited her. I remembered how I'd planned to inherit that blanket, how we used to wrap ourselves at play in its folds and be chieftains and princesses. Now I've found a quilt I'd like to die under. 6 Van Dyke brown squares, 2 white ones, and 1 square, the yellow-brown of Mama's cheeks. Each square holds a sweet gum leaf whose fingers, I imagine, would caress me into the silence. I think I'd have good dreams for 100 years under this quilt, as Mima must have under her blanket, dreamed she was a girl again in Kentucky among her yellow sisters, their grandfather's white family nodding at them when they met. When their father came home from his store, they cranked up the pianola, and all of the family sisters giggled and danced. She must have dreamed about Mama when the dancing was over, a lanky girl trailing after her father through his Oklahoma field. Perhaps under this quilt I'd dream of myself, of my childhood of miracles, of my father's burnt umber pride, my mother's ochre gentleness. Within the dream of myself, perhaps I'd meet my son or my other child, as yet unconceived. I'd call it the Century Quilt, after its pattern of leaves. Next, a baseball poem shows how a son only comes to understand and appreciate what his father tried to teach him and all the sacrifices that his father made as well. He only comes to understand this years later. And this is called Sign for My Father Who Stressed the Bunt by David Bottoms. On the rough diamond, the hand-cut field below the dog lot and barn, we rehearsed the strict technique of bunting. I watched from the infield mound, the backstop, as your left hand climbed the bat, your legs and shoulders squared toward the pitcher. You could drop it like a seed down either baseline. I admired your style, but not enough to take my eyes off the bank that served as our center field fence. Years passed, 3 leagues of organized ball, no few lives. I could homer into the left field lot of Carmichael Motors, and still you stressed the same technique, the crouch and spring, the lead arm absorbing just enough impact, the whole tiresome pitch about basics never changing. And I never learned what you were laying down. Like a hand brushed across the bill of a cap. Let this be the sign. I'm getting a grip on the sacrifice. Next, a father's reflection on reading to his kids shows the powerful bond between a father and his daughter because they share beautiful literature. This is depicted in Reading to My Kids by Cavan, Kerry. When they were little, I read to them at night until my tongue got tired. They would poke me when I started to nod off after 20 pages of Harry Potter or Lemony Snicket. I read to them to get them to love reading, but I was never sure if it was working or if it was just what I was supposed to do. But one day, my daughter, 15 then, was finishing Of Mice and Men in the car on our way to basketball. She was at the end when I heard her say, "No," in a familiar, frightened voice, and I knew right away where she was. "Let's do it now," Lenny begged. "Let's get that place now." "Sure, right now. We gotta." And she started crying, and then I started crying. And I think I saw Steinbeck in the back seat, nodding his head. And it felt right to me, like I'd done something right. And I thought to myself, keep going. Read it to me, please, please. I can take it. And my favorite poem to teach to kids, Billy Collins' The Lanyard, gives us a son's reflection on a childish gift that he had given to his mother when he was very young. He thought at the time that he was giving her something quite extraordinary. Only in reflecting on this gift many years later as an adult does he realize, first, all of the sacrifices that his mother had made for him without any expectation of reward or remuneration, and the absolute impossibility of ever repaying our parents. So this is The Lanyard by Billy Collins. The other day, I was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, moving as if underwater, from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, when I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one into the past more suddenly. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one, if that's what you did with them. But that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the air light and taught me to walk and swim. And I, in turn, presented her with a lanyard. "Here are thousands of meals," she said, "and here is clothing and a good education." "And here is your lanyard," I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. "Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world," she whispered. "And here," I said, "is the lanyard I made at camp. And here I wish to say to her now is a smaller gift, not the worn truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the two-toned lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. So these are just a few. These are 5 poems that I loved to teach seniors in high school. They made poetry feel accessible to kids. They always generated terrific discussion and writing. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.